Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland Hahn Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Hahn Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Sandi Johnson. Sandi leads the fundraising for guide dogs here in Kingston. What's unique about Sandi is how getting her own guide dog, Kane, had such a life-changing impact on her life that it made her even more passionate about championing this cause. And be sure to listen to the end, where Sandi shares with us some tips on what you can do to support guide dogs here in Kingston too. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the world of guide dogs, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Sandi Johnson, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Sandi, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, I think the work that you guys do over there at Guide Dogs for the Blind, and especially here in the Kingston area, one, it's very important. And two, I've recently learned something that really struck a chord with me and made me want to have this conversation with you more than ever. And that is that for people with sight loss, social isolation, somewhat akin to what we've experienced during these last 15 months of in and outs of lockdown because of COVID, that social isolation, it can be there every day. And I think that our listeners can learn a lot from your experience in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. Sandi, where did you grow up?
I grew up, for the first few years of my life, I grew up in Johannesburg in South Africa.
Oh,
my
wow.
parents were over there. My grandparents, or my grandfather was in the gold and the diamond industry, hence why he moved from the UK over there. My father was taken over there with his brother when he was a teenager. And then we moved back to the UK, as I say, when I was about 4. We lived in Osterley, so we didn't come very far off of the aeroplane before settling. And then it was through me and my love of horses, I became a Hampton Court horse ranger.
Oh, wow.
So my parents would drive me to that every weekend. And my parents didn't really want to do the return journey just for a few hours, so decided that they would go adventuring along the river. They'd hire boats, go for lunch, that kind of thing. They found Thames Ditton Island. And we've never looked back. My parents still live on the island in Thames Ditton. I grew up there, had an idyllic upbringing on the river and on boats and all sorts of different modes of river transport that I've experienced, and gone through the schooling system in and around Thames Ditton. So Thames Ditton Junior School, Hinchley Wood was my secondary school, and then on to Brooklands in Weybridge was my college of choice to do a business and finance course.
Oh, fantastic. And I was going to ask you about what you studied after secondary school. So as you mentioned, it was business and finance.
Yeah, which has given me quite a good overview for sort of taking on this task to lead the Guide Dog Kingston fundraising group.
That's fantastic. And Sandi, could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you started your work with guide dogs here in Kingston?
Yeah, so I went, as I say, I went to Brooklands College, did my business and finance course there. The infrastructure or the technology wasn't around when I was growing up that we all have the luxury of today, with iPads, with speech technology, enlarged computer screens, all that sort of thing wasn't available. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to university. It's one of my sort of biggest regrets in life, really. But I did manage to time it right, where the Benthall Centre in Kingston was being built at the time. Started to as an assistant manager in a toy shop when the Benthall Centre first opened up.
Oh, wow.
And then worked my way up in a company called Toy Stack, and you managed various stores for them around the local area. including their flagship store in Croydon, and then went on to do window displays, merchandising, that kind of thing, training up their other managers where new shops were opening. So my background is really retail, but locally to this area.
That's really interesting. And to bring this conversation a little bit more to the present, could you tell us a little bit about your work to raise awareness and funds, of course, for guide dogs here in Kingston?
So yeah, I've had my guide dog, Kane. I'm registered blind myself, so obviously very enthusiastic and wanting to help this charity for selfish means, really. But Kane and I have been partnered for over 4 years now. I've been involved with the charity from a fundraising and a volunteering point of view for the last 3 or 4 years myself. Started off very small scale, just as a volunteer, being led by a coordinator locally in the area myself. And then the roles of just where people have fallen away, other volunteers have moved away, various reasons, their circumstances have changed. I've then fallen into doing different roles within the group, whether that's the coordinator, whether that's the merchandise trade person who takes all the stock and does the stock take and takes it out and about for trade shows, to local school events, that kind of stuff. Whether it's putting a collection box, life-size or countertop into shops and things that are prepared to have them. Arranging events, dine in the dark events that we arrange with local pubs. We've done wine tasting events with Laithwaites in Surbiton, who we're very grateful to. So my role within the group has just grown and expanded, and I felt more comfortable to sort of, dip my toe with different ideas. And obviously over the last year, trying to learn to fundraise in a very different way because of the pandemic and having to do it more virtually.
That's brilliant. And Sandi, I think it's interesting how you described all the different events that you and your team do to be able to raise funds for guide dogs here in Kingston. And I wonder if, for the benefit of our listeners who perhaps just haven't thought about this, maybe just because of in their life, immediate family, there'd just be no need to ever think about this. I am right in saying what I said at the top of the show, aren't I? That people with sight loss, this feeling of social isolation, it can be there every day. And a guide dog, apart from being just I think they are just the most majestic creatures, because not only are they dogs, and I've got just a soft spot for dogs, period, but the responsibility that dog takes on through its training, of course, I just find it beautiful. And that is a means. Kane, for example, for you, is a means to help you see. It's incredible to think this, isn't it?
He is absolutely my eyes. He is my life changer. Social isolation, going back to your original point, is huge. It was huge for me. Probably the year or so before I got him, I was bumping into curbs, falling off of curbs, bumping into lampposts. I think doing the school run with my son, people may have thought I was drunk sometimes. Or standoffish, because I would walk past people in the street who normally I would say hello to. But I don't see that level of detail. I may see if there's a blob in front of me, but sometimes because I've lost the central vision in both of my eyes and now most of my peripheral, I simply don't see until somebody's right in my face. So he is my eyes, he is my world. And I did start to retreat into myself, and I did stop going out. And it was friends, and one friend in particular, who said, look, I really think it's time now for you to pursue looking into guide dogs and potentially going on to get one. And I've never looked back since. I couldn't manage without Kane. He's saved my life on several occasions where he's held me back from crossing the road. Obviously, when you've got electric vehicles, electric scooters, that kind of thing buzzing around on the roads now, life's pretty treacherous out there if you can't see very well.
Absolutely. No, it's huge. And I, for one, am just a passionate believer in the work that Guide Dogs for the Blind do. And obviously the work that I'm now aware that you do here in Kingston to raise awareness for this amazing cause here in our area. And with that in mind, Sandi, how can our listeners get involved in supporting your efforts and the organisation as a whole?
We would be super grateful for any involvement. We would love volunteers, even if it's a small amount of time that you can give up and attend events to help us, because obviously being visually impaired myself, running the stall if I'm out at Surbiton Farmers Market, for example, is a challenge for me. So we need sighted volunteers as well as visually impaired or blind volunteers. A lot of the time I'm front of the stall because obviously people want to see and pat Kane. I'm not behind the stall selling, but people do want to know a lot about the charity. So I'm happy to stand and talk to them about that, which I can't do if I don't have enough volunteers. So volunteering just a couple of hours of your time would be fantastic. From a financial point of view, we have a virtual Just Giving page that we can hopefully put into the show notes at the end of this podcast if anybody would like to donate, and that would be to our local Kingston group. Any kind of business that would potentially like to sponsor a guide dog, we've got schemes that vary in price, whether it's a small business and you just wanted to put a small amount of money in, right the way through to a corporate where you actually name that dog yourself and it is the name of your company. Mm-hmm. And then you get to meet the dog themselves and see the progress of the dog all the way through its training. There are very many levels that you can get involved with, whether it's a school and you just want to have myself in to talk to the children. Any kind of awareness. It doesn't have to be financial. It is just spreading that word about what we do. Even the fact that people that are wandering around with guide dogs aren't always completely blind. It's a myth. You know, I do have a small amount of sight, yet I have a guide dog. So many people aren't aware of that. So if we can educate the children in our local area about what guide dogs are, what they do, all of that's beneficial, and it helps enormously as these children grow.
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. And every time that I've got two young children, both under 5, and every time that we see someone with a guide dog raising funds, be it at the front of a supermarket or in a farmer's market at a weekend, not only are the kids obviously dead keen to pat the dog, but I think it's also an important conversation point, because I think more than ever for kids my age, that awareness of other elements that go around them in the world, I think is super important. It makes them grow up with a better vision as to what the world is like and how diverse the world is, and how we really need to be mindful of other people's requirements and needs, and perhaps even be mindful of the fact that for us to live in a society that functions properly, we all need to do our bit, and maybe we have an opportunity to do a bit to a cause such as Guide Dogs for the Blind. So I think it's super important, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Sandi, you've obviously had the benefit or just the experience of going through life with this slightly different perspective, given that you don't have your full sight. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned throughout your life that you could share with our listeners today?
I think the hardest one for me has been to ask for help. And actually, I think over the last year in particular, people have gone back into their local communities. Businesses have come together a lot more. They're all trying to help each other a lot more. What can we do to help each other? And actually, there's almost been a stigma attached to asking for help in the past, which perhaps may not be there to such a degree moving forward. And if we can keep that going after this pandemic is over, would be a wonderful thing. So I think for me, it's actually asking for help, really.
Yeah, a huge lesson. And I definitely second the fact that I was probably at some points in my life just a bit too, I don't know what the word is, maybe arrogant to ask for help. And life has changed for the better since I embraced the habit of asking for help when I need it. So I definitely second that strongly. And also, like you, I hope that sticks around, because that sentiment, that feeling definitely is around now in these almost hopefully post-pandemic days.
Indeed.
When you look back at your life journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I think as a mother, it's always going to be my son. I've always wanted children. Pre-career, pre-business, anything that I've done in my life, I always wanted to have children. The island in Thames Ditton where I grew up, I looked after friends' children. I babysat the entire time I was growing up, and I probably had more disposable income when I was a child and quite industrious than I do now. But it was always about children for me, and to the extent even my business that I was running, the Toy Stack company, it was always about toys. It was going to the toy fair in London, and I always wanted my own children. So when I had my son, that was the highlight for me.
That's brilliant. And what next for you and Guide Dogs Kingston? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I'm really excited, actually. We got a local artist involved last Christmas. This is one of my ideas to try and fundraise in a different way, because we weren't going out and about for Christmas markets and things. And so we got a local artist called Lisa Tolley to design a Christmas card for us, which then I would have designed by her. But then I was getting local companies to put their logos on the back of the card. In exchange for that, they would put in X amount of money to help fund these cards. And then I was sending them out all over the country. We've got quite a good platform within Guide Dogs Kingston on Facebook and on Instagram. So we were selling through their various cards. And so our latest project is we've got a different artist who's done a watercolour picture, and we're looking for sponsors to sponsor the back of this new card, which we're hoping to launch in the next month or so.
That's fantastic.
So
exciting times ahead.
Indeed, yes.
Very good. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Sandi, what do you do to relax outside of the office as such?
Gardening is one of my passions. I think it would be my husband's nightmare for me to be in the garden, because as soon as he's planting things, unless it's an established plant, I think it's a weed, and I go along behind him having planted something and pick it straight back out again. But we do love being in our garden, out in nature, and obviously walking Kane. So you've got when Kane is working, it's one of these big myths that guide dogs work extremely hard, which they do when they're working, but it's only for a couple of hours of the day really when you need them. The rest of the time they're lying around at home being just a regular dog. But when he's on what's known as a free run and we're out in the commons and things, that is a marvellous thing. And I do love walking and taking him to new different walks that I can go on. So yeah, walking, gardening, those kinds of things. That's brilliant. And are there any books or perhaps audio books that you've heard recently that you'd recommend to our listeners? I'm terrible. I love my audiobooks. I subscribe to Audible, but it really is the chick lit stuff for me. Nothing that's going to be inspirational to most. I think one of my most recent books was a Lucy Diamond. I just like rubbish in the background. I'm establishing the fact that I really like podcasts a lot more, and short bursts of interviews with people I'm finding far more fascinating and slightly more inspirational. So trying to move away from my chick lit a bit more. Well, you say that, but for me, I'm also an Audible subscriber. And for me, Audible is all about entertainment rather than learning. So I'm a big P.G. Wodehouse fan when it comes to Audible. And the ones that are read by Jonathan Cecil in particular are just masterful. They're funny. They laugh out loud. So look, I'm with you. That's my little secret for sure. Well, not a secret anymore. Are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners? I'm so behind the times. I am now sitting, finally, I think everyone else has caught up on it in the world except me. I've started watching The Crown, and I'm into the second season of The Crown. I'm quite fixated with that at the moment. I realise that a lot of it's is fiction, but a lot of it's not, and you sort of pick and choose the bits. But I think it's our monarchy is important to us and to our country, and I'm quite enjoying that at the moment. No, I'm with you, and it's been mentioned on the show a couple of times, and I think what all of us that have mentioned it on the show have said is it's great storytelling. It's just great storytelling. Yeah. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and Guide Dogs Kingston? The main place is really to find the charity. Obviously, you've got Guide Dogs UK is a good starting point, but on a more local level, we've got a really good presence as Guide Dogs Kingston. We're on Facebook. We are on Instagram as well as on Guide Dogs Kingston. Kane, the guide dog, he has his own profile on Instagram, so you can follow him and watch what he gets up to. And then I'm Blind Bat 4 on Instagram for a different flavour of what goes on with my life and what I get up to. So we've not made it to Twitter yet. So I think this is there's too many things out there to be involved in. So just Instagram and Facebook for now. And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add all these links to the show notes. Sandi, no worries. Sandi, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story. Thank you so much for having me. That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast.
Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.